Some very nice warm weather shots there with lots of bright color. Good evening. My name is Bill Morse, and I want to welcome you to another edition of What Do You Think? A call-in program. A little later on, you'll see numbers at the bottom of the screen should you like to call in and participate, add something. Today is the 27th of January, Thursday, the 27th of January, and I thought that this evening and perhaps the next 2 weeks, we'll be talking about what has been commonly referred to as the Great Reset. Over the last 2 years, I'm sure many of you have heard of the Great Reset, and I have been curious about where the term came from, who was responsible for it, and what some very influential people mean by that, and what their plans are for this reset or restart of our society, not only in this country but on in a global view. So this past couple of weeks, from January 20, a little background information here first. From January 17th to the 21st, there was a 4-day meeting, a series of conferences and seminars in Davos, Switzerland. Now, some of you may have heard of Davos, the Davos Summit. This Davos Summit is sponsored by an organization called the World Economic Forum, or WEF, World Economic Forum. And I would urge you to visit their website. Not only is there information about what their mission is and who is part of their team, so to speak, but also a detailed summary of this 4-day meeting that took place earlier this month. We're going to be looking at the meeting in the next 2 weeks, but just as an introduction, as a touch point, is something that's very, very current. These meetings are sponsored by the chairman or the organizer of the World Economic Forum. His name is Mr. Klaus Schwab, S-C-H-W-A-B, Klaus Schwab, and he is by trade an economist and an engineer. He started the WEF almost 50 years ago, roughly 71, 72, and I believe since then there have been yearly meetings at Davos in Switzerland for the purpose of discussing a worldview of events that and influences that would likely change and profit by a reset of how our society works, how it lives, how it trades, etc. And I thought it would be interesting to look at a couple of sources of information from the World Economic Forum itself and also from some outside voices. And so this evening I wanted to start with a review of the book COVID-19, The Great Reset. Now, this book was written by Klaus Schwab, and it was published in July of 2020. So the epidemic, or the pandemic started towards the end of March, and so this book came out relatively soon after the start. The pandemic was only 4 months or so underway, no less than that, 2 to 3 months underway when this book was published. And so the Great Reset kind of sparked my interest. I've read about half of it. And I've read half of it. It's a little difficult to go through. Myself, I'm not an economist, and I enjoy reading, but after the author says for the fourth or fifth time the same thing in a different word order, it's hard to kind of wade through. The book, which we will look at probably next week, is about 238 pages, and most of what Mr. Schwab and Thierry Malloret, a French gentleman, said could have been said probably in 70 pages, but that's all right. There are some nuggets of information that I would like to share and explore with you. But first, as I said before, I wanted to go through a review from a group called, a review of the book, called Hillsdale College. And their publication is called Imprimis, which I believe is from the Latin imprimi, which means to print. And it's a publication, as I said, of Hillsdale College out of Michigan. Yes, Hillsdale, Michigan. And if you go online to, what is it? www.hillsdale.edu, Hillsdale, Hillsdale.edu. You can go online and sign up for a paper copy of a newsletter that comes out on a monthly basis, and you can also receive by email in an attachment a digital version of their newsletter. This particular one, this print version that I received in the mail, dated October of last year, 2021, is on ensuring election integrity. And it discusses a commission made up of former President Jimmy Carter and I believe it was, I want to get his name right, James Baker, former Secretary of State. And they came up with a commission report in which they, interestingly enough, supported voter ID as a manner of people voting in a regulated and relatively clean election. So we're not talking about that this evening. What we're talking about is the digital newsletter that I received called What is the Great Reset, written by the name, a gentleman by the name of Michael Rechtenwald. And Michael Rechtenwald is Chief Academic Officer for American Scholars. And he is a writer. He wrote a book that I have not read yet but sounds interesting called Google Archipelago. Last time I heard of the word archipelago, you may remember last year we talked for two periods or two editions about Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Soviet dissident who lived in Cavendish for about 20 years. And he wrote the book Gulag Archipelago about the vast system of work camps that had been established in the 30s, 40s, and ran up until, I'd say, the 50s, the Khrushchev era. And it's interesting to take the Gulag Archipelago and then write a book called the Google Archipelago. So I'm interested in reading that, and perhaps during a future edition we can talk about the Google Archipelago that Mr. Rechtenwald has written. But anyway, he wrote this review of What is the Great Reset, and I really have no prior knowledge, so this was kind of an eye-opener for me, and it kind of gave me the incentive to look through different lenses at what exactly Mr. Klaus Schwab is saying in his, I'm going to call it a manifesto, and it's not a slight, but it's his view of where the world should be heading. and how he's doing that with about 300 people who are very powerful in our world from different areas of life: banking, government, corporate law, etc. And so what Michael Rechtenwald states is that a little bit about the background of Mr. Charles, not Charles, that's the son, Klaus Schwab, and that the idea behind the reset, or what Mr. Schwab would like to change, is the type of capitalism that we have lived with over the last 150 years. He advocates a change from what is called stakeholder, capitalist, shareholder. Sorry, that's the word I was looking for. Shareholder capitalism, in which a corporation is responsible only to the shareholders, the people who own part of that company through their stock certificates, and a stakeholder type of capitalism, which not only takes care of the shareholder, but takes care of the people whose service or product that corporation comes in contact with. In other words, the quality of the product, the impact that product has on people's lives, the impact the manufacturing and use of that product has on the environment, and how that product and corporation can participate in raising the living standards of most people across the world. And he has had this idea for the last, since he started the forum nearly 50 years ago. And he sees a more, and then I can, quote directly from the review, but he sees mankind basically in an endless cycle of hunger, war, violence, and a great imbalance between the haves and the have-nots. Certainly one of the results of the type of, arguably one of the results, the larger result of the type of capitalism that we have. He would advocate a type of capitalism whereby the people who benefit are not just those who make money from selling the product or the service, but the product or service is such that it receives government support, government financial sponsoring. So he advocates more of a partnership between corporate America, let's say, and the United States government. And we certainly have seen that already. We've seen that at work with technology, whereby through our military research, technical companies, the internet, for example, and Apple, Google, the iPhone, as I said, the internet, have all had their roots or their genesis through research conducted by the U.S. military. And so we have already had this relationship. The relationship, I believe, started in World War II, when the United States had to go from a depressed economy to one that was geared for rapid production of war material, airplanes, ships, guns, tanks, etc. And that this required very complicated and far-reaching relationship between the U.S. government, in this case President Roosevelt, and the heads of different companies like General Electric, Ford Motor Company, Boeing Aircraft, et cetera, And that, when the war ended in 1945, and we were looking at the peace dividend that that proved to be elusive because, as most of us know who are older or have studied history, the Second World War was replaced by the Cold War. And that required decades of financial investment in defense and offensive weaponry, and the relationship between the U.S. government and private corporations deepened. There were more partnerships. And now, even in Bellows Falls, between the state and the town, or even on a federal level, you see partnerships geared towards development, remediation of brownfields from former factory sites, etc. So it's interesting. We are here in Bellows Falls area, and Washington is kind of like a very abstract concept, a place that perhaps we hear about from time to time through the media. And it's a presence that's actually, according to the vision here that is reviewed by Michael Rechtenberg, Walt, the vision of Klaus Schwab and the 300 or 400 people that have been instrumental in meeting every year at Davos, Switzerland, and providing updates on plans. It's going to, there's a gradual trend towards more government involvement in government, in manufacturing, in the production of consumer products, and actually to the point of providing social services. So you see this marriage, so to speak. At one time, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, you had capitalism, private corporations, and then you had a minor role for the government. The government's job was to protect us and keep us safe. But through World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War, through the military-industrial complex, that relationship got deeper and deeper. They worked together, and according to Klaus Schwab in his The Great Reset, the epidemic or the pandemic over the last year and a half, almost 2 years, gives us an opportunity, again, according to the author, Klaus Schwab, the opportunity to set things, to speed things up, so to speak. Instead of something taking 10 years to progress, it takes 2 or 3 years. And what's progressing? It is this marriage to the point of two becoming one. You're having, instead of government and corporate industry or big pharma, whatever branch of corporate world or banking, you have them kind of meshing together to the point where it's very difficult for the average individual, and I'll assume also for lawmakers, to tell the difference. Where does the influence of a corporation end, and where does the influence of an elected official, a democracy, begin? And the vision here, outlined in this review, points to more of a socially engineered construct that gradually is replacing a nationalistic democracy. When I say a construct, I'm talking about a worldview. Corporations that we are familiar with, and anything from Coca-Cola to Ford Motor Company to Siemens to Pfizer, these are all multinational corporations. And many of them have members working through from different countries. And some of these countries have governments that are, well, not at war, but certainly on different paths towards the future. At least that was the case. They seem to be closing ranks, and I cite the United States and China, our democracy and the Chinese Communist Party. And we, through globalism, through free trade, I'm not going to say fair trade because we don't have fair trade. Fair trade does not exist. But free trade, through free trade agreements, we have our people in different parts of the world and people from different parts of the world working with us. And as long as the path towards the future was the same, that kind of worked. I think it's become apparent over the last 2 years, especially through the discussion centered around the origins of COVID-19, of this virus, that ourselves and other countries such as China, most notably, are on different paths. And it is the aim of the World Economic Forum to bring these two paths together so that both China and the United States are heading lockstep in the same direction as the future. How that's going to happen is really worthy of discussion. And what I'm going to say is just touching the surface. If you would like to join in and add your 2 cents or ask a question or offer some additional information, I'd appreciate that. I'm just working with right now the review that appeared in Imprimis, the publication of Hillsdale College, as a starting point. Okay, there are other viewpoints we're going to touch upon as well. Interestingly enough, okay, I'm going to just, when I talk about two different approaches to the future, the U.S. approach and the Chinese approach, this is a paragraph here. I'm just going to read it if you'll allow me. It says in there, this is from Michael Rechtenwald, the author of the review. In their recent book on the Great Reset, Schwab and Mallory pit stakeholder capitalism against neoliberalism, defining the latter as a corpus of ideas and policy favoring competition over solidarity. In other words, the type of capitalism that we have had here in this country over the last 150 years, the capitalism that started with Mellon, started with Carnegie, started with J.P. Morgan, the bankers, the railroaders, the land barons, etc., that was neoliberalism. In other words, you have a corporation that provides employment. Through this employment, the need for labor, people's standard of living rises. The corporations compete against each other to offer a better product, to offer a better service, and one company perhaps goes out of business or is taken over by another. Hence, we have monopolies such as we now see in the field of technology through, and also not only technology, but retail, as is the case with Amazon, Google, and Apple. And we're going to see that the great restart through the pandemic, through the shutdown of the economy, actually benefited these companies. So it goes on to say, favoring competition over solidarity, creative destruction over government intervention. I'm not sure what he means by creative destruction. Government intervention would be what you would call stakeholder capitalism. In other words, the government in league with the private corporations has intervention, and we've seen some of this intervention from a military standpoint and also a commercial standpoint in other countries. In other words, neoliberalism refers to the free enterprise system, the capitalism we've had over the last 150 years. In opposing that system, stakeholder capitalism, which is what Klaus Schwab sees as the future for the world, entails corporate cooperation with the state and vastly increased government intervention in the economy. So for people that think the answer is more government, a higher tax contributions, more controls and regulations, this is where Klaus Schwab sees the world as heading in a general effort to not so much raise the standard of living for Americans, but actually to tone down the financial advances most Americans have made, and at the same time raise the financial standing of the third world, less fortunate people living, let's say, in Africa, parts of Latin America, etc. And he sees this as being possible through what he calls, Schwab that is, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. Fourth Industrial Revolution is what we are living in right now. It is the growth of digital record-keeping, digital governance, not just in state or federal level, but in private corporations, data harvesting, data tracking, data sharing, and he sees this, and I would agree, he sees this Great Reset as an opportunity to promote and speed along this narrowing, this joining of the paths towards the future between disparate governments like the United States, democracy, and Chinese Communist Party, which has only embraced capitalism as one stage in the long-term plan of raising the wealth of the country, China, to a point where it can compete as far as comfort level with Western nations. But once that is taken care of and the material comforts of the people are taken care of so that there's no hunger, people have houses to live in, people have access to clean water, to dependable transportation, to jobs. Once that's taken care of, and that was done through capitalism, again, free trade, not fair trade, but free trade, whereby we lost a lot of our manufacturing jobs that went over to China, and Chinese, through their cheap labor, sometimes forced or prison labor, lack of environmental controls, and direct state sponsorship of the particular companies, has been able to offer the same products for a fraction of the price, thus winning the world market for electronics. Big example right there. I think the last televisions, electronics went to Japan in the late 50s and the 60s, and then in the 70s went from Japan, and what was left of the U.S. manufacturing market also went to China. So you had what was left in the U.S. and what had been moved to Japan coming down to China, because China, of course, was still trying to get out of this agrarian society, farmers, and become more of city dwellers, and that required jobs. So it's a digital age, and we have seen, because it's a digital age, there are no national borders or barriers. There's no protective zones, because digital, the access is free. It flows all the time. And so this timing of shutting down our economy because of the pandemic, because of lockdowns, because of measures that the government, through the CDC which actually is a private organization. The Center of Disease Control is not part of the government. It's a private organization. And like all private organizations, it's subject to influence from donors. And who is donating to the CDC? I'll give you a couple of guesses, but I don't think I need to spell out the possible donors who influence with their contribution not only organizations like the CDC, but commissions that sit on the United Nations. I mean, it's an open market to the highest bidder. You can have, these people are very wealthy that come together in Davos. They have access to different organizations, and this, what we're talking about here are health organizations, but they also have access to committees that are part of the Senate or the Congress. Our Supreme Court said that corporations, and by corporations I also mean foreign governments, because foreign governments subsidize some of these multinational corporations. The Chinese aren't the only ones to do this. They have access to people running for office here in this country. And they have just as, according to the Supreme Court, they have just as much a right to donate to a candidate who's running for Congress or who's running for the Senate. They have just as much right to contribute to that person's campaign chest as you or me or somebody else that is more local but has financial means to make a large contribution. So nothing new. Money greases wheels and money gets attention. I'm hoping that someday, before it's too late for our democracy, that the Supreme Court will reconsider what type of access unlimited money has on our political candidates, and that we actually take integrity of our candidates more seriously. And I think some of that is happening in that congressmen and senators are now limited as to stock transactions that they can undertake. And rightly so, there was a fear that our lawmakers would easily have insider information as to what stocks were going to go up or down according to the laws or bills that they proposed. So all this kind of gels into this mass of money, of government and corporate power, be it in the energy field, be it in pharmaceuticals, be it in banking. And I think, and we'll touch a few more points on this review, I'm just free-forming thought here. I'm not reading verbatim from what this gentleman said. I think that democracy is going to be left out. Our votes will, if this type of a global power, it may not be the World Economic Forum, but it will certainly be a group that's supported and goes by the guidelines of this stakeholder type of capitalism, whereby you have a marriage of capitalism as we've known it, and we also have a socialism, call it communism if you want, because that's the form of government in China, whereby people's needs, social needs, are taken care of, but at the same time, their participation in how things are run is very limited. Kind of the opposite of what we would like to see as an ideal form of democracy. So the premise here is you've got a choice. You can stay with the democracy, you can stay with your nationalistic views, your isolationism when something happens overseas and you'd rather not deal with it. You can maintain the status quo with a great disparity between rich or poor, and I'm just saying what the outline of this, the thought process is from the World Economic Forum. Or you can, through the use of technology, exercise a world government type of control, whereby you have the best of capitalism. In other words, you have some material wealth for everyone, comfort. Everybody has a house, everybody has something to eat, clothes, everybody has a job, perhaps 20 hours a week. Or you could do something independently if it falls within the guidelines of the government. And that's the other side of the coin. You have everybody, 95% of the population, kind of on one level, and their needs, their social needs are taken care of. Nowhere are spiritual needs addressed, but the material needs of the 95% are taken care of. And then the second tier of the society that is proposed by the Great Reset is where you have the bureaucrats, the technocrats, that are running the digital apparatus to kind of keep things running smoothly as far as, let's take supply chain, as far as ending conflict, warlike conflict, because everybody will be kind of in the same pool. Now, it's interesting. There's a ways to go. I don't think, even if everybody signed up for this, you still have very volatile parts of the world. You have parts of the world that have a very strong faith-based way of looking at life, especially in the Middle East. So I'm not sure how, even if you were able to convince everyone, for example, to gradually buy into this digital overseer type of two-tier government, us and then a small group of them, maybe 300 or 400, that are kind of controlling things digitally throughout the world. I'm not sure that, first of all, as I said, there are some parts of the world that, unlike the United States or Europe or Australia or perhaps even Japan, China, that would, for religious reasons, not go along with this, and would rather remain autonomous or independent. I'm talking about some countries in the Middle East. But it's very attractive, even though it's two-tiered, and you give up basically your free will and you give up your vote or your say in how things are done. You're taken care of. I think what I've seen over the last 2 years is that many people are willing to follow directives if they believe the directives will save their comfort level, take care of them. In other words, they are willing, I can't give you a percentage, but I know a lot of people who I believe would be willing to forego making their own decisions, and in exchange for a guaranteed income, in exchange for guaranteed health care of some kind, in exchange for a guaranteed home or a place to sleep, they would give up their voting rights. I believe they would give up any type of participation government because they're not making any of the decisions. And just to have all the insecurities that more independently minded people not only deal with, but actually enthusiastically look at it as positive challenges in life, to create your own life through in this realm of freedom. So it's interesting. We are alive at perhaps the most interesting time of human existence. We can change the weather. We can actually, and it'll happen within 5 to 10 years, we can actually make use of free energy, a technology that I think has been covered. When I say covered, I mean it has not been released. It's an interesting time because also for many people who are willing to go into this realm of spirit of material comfort in exchange for handing over their power or their decision-making capabilities, you have that dangling in front of us, that apple dangling in front of us. And a lot of corporate pressure and a lot of government pressure have actually been pushing that agenda. And most of the population has been kind of going through this type of training whereby we take things away from you and then we give them back. We can, which is the case in Australia, we can tell you you can't leave your home because of the pandemic, and this is for your safety. We tell you that you have to work remotely. Your children have to learn remotely. Your children need to cover up. So that gradually we are creating this fertile ground of isolation, of separateness between ourselves and our neighbor, our fellow human beings. And this willingness to, okay, I've had enough, I want to freely walk around, what do I have to do? And then this is what you have to do. Take medicine, for example. And the medicine may work, it may not. But you follow our directives and you can resume your life, go to your restaurant, you can go shopping or whatever, until we have the next event. Now that the pandemic is winding down and Omicron is taking on more and more the characteristics of the flu, we have another event that supposedly is taking shape, a war event in Ukraine. So it always seems that we're being presented with the cage is shaken up a little bit. And to stop the cage from shaking, we have to basically fall in line with this narrative of type of socialism capitalism or communism capitalism, whereby through digital means we hand over control of our lives in exchange for peace, for nourishment. And we're talking, and it's attractive, and I'm going to end here for tonight. It's attractive because who doesn't want world peace? Who does not want an end to suffering through lack of medicine? Who doesn't want an end of hunger, lack of food, or lack of proper distribution, thirst for lack of water, clean water? And how do we know about these things? Through the media and through these pinpointed events like wars, famines, natural disasters. I mean, we haven't even touched on the climate, on how dealing with the environment is also an opportunity to kind of coalesce the world governments, the U.S. government, the Chinese government, so that we have this non-democratic corporate government marriage that is making the decisions that kind of take care of us as the 95% and leave our power or hand over our free will to the 5% that the Klaus Schwabs or the Bill Gates or the others that have this vision for a world with fewer people, but better cared for people. So I'm going to end right there. Just to look at my notes, I think it's a lot to take in. That's why it's difficult. You really can't depend on mainstream media because you have sound bites. And this is not soundbite material. This requires some critical thinking, some analysis, and if you're just an average person like me, limited time to read or to research this and then to put it together, it can be discouraging, but I can't think of anything more important to understand than what someone plans for us. I'll leave with one saying. This was told to me by someone who was running for state rep. He had been serving on the city council for about 12 years, and he was running for state representative. And he said, politics are very important, and people downplay they kind of laugh and make political jokes. But he says, in politics and in government, if you are not seated at the table, you're definitely going to be on the menu. And I'm afraid we're all on the menu unless we start looking at what groups such as the World Economic Forum are doing. And it's not going to be all negative, it's not going to be all positive. And therein lies the nuances that really need to be worked out in a short period of time. So I'm going to wish everybody a good weekend coming up. Stay indoors if you have to for the snow coming on Saturday. Next week will be pre-recorded. I'm going to be away next Thursday, so I'll pre-record the show on Wednesday. And we'll continue the discussion. So again, I hope you found this interesting. If you would like to, if you feel so inclined, look up on your own. Do a search for World Economic Forum, WEF, and you'll see, you'll be greeted by Mr. Klaus Schwab, and there's a detailed summary of the 4-day meeting in Davos that took place the 17th through the 21st of this month. So take care and cheers. God bless.